23rd meeting of the Lane County Budget Committee to order. And the first section that we have on the agenda this evening is committee business. Actually, real quick, I will ask Christine, do you have anything for the committee before I get started with the rest of the agenda?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing from staff.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, so we've got the agenda here on screen, and let me make an adjustment here so I can see people. Thank you. And so the committee business, the first thing we have is election of the chair and vice chair for this budget year. And so I will take nominations from the floor. If somebody, I see Jay.
I'd like to nominate Herb Flodman for chair.
Thank you, Jay.
I'll second that. I'm having, excuse me just a minute, I'm trying to get my settings to where I can see everyone because I can only see the speaker and the shared screen. So pardon me if somebody was raising their hand and I hopped in the queue ahead of them.
Thank you for the nomination in the second. Are there any other nominations for chair? I'm not seeing any on screen. Oh, Commissioner Burney, please.
This is not another nomination. I'm just curious. Do we have any rule about how long someone can serve consecutive terms? Although if it's not broke, why fix it? Thank
you. Any other nominations for chair? Oh, Mr. Hazen, I see a hand. Oh, sorry, that was my own hand floating around the screen. It's a Zoom meeting. Okay, seeing no other nominations for chair, let's just move forward to the vote. All those in favor of having myself, Herb Flodman, as chair for this budget year, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much. I'm happy to serve as your chair. So we'll open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
Chair, I'd like to nominate Chris Pryor as our vice chair.
Very good. Is there a second for Chris Pryor?
I'll second Chris Pryor.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner Bosevich. Any other nominations for vice chair? Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor of having Chris Pryor as our vice chair, please say aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Welcome, Chris, you're vice chair. Congratulations. Okay, so let's move forward into the next section in our committee business. We have some minutes to review, and we'll go ahead and take these in order individually. So we've been presented with the minutes from the May 20th, 2021 meeting. Does anybody have any comments or updates to the minutes as they were presented? Seeing none and hearing none, is there a motion to approve them as presented?
I so move.
Thank you, Dawn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Chris. All those in favor of approving the minutes as presented, please say aye. Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Okay, motion passes. The minutes for May 20th are approved as presented. We'll move on to the minutes from January 19th, 2022. And staff has presented us with one modification that was presented. So we can take a look at those minutes and decide how we would like to proceed with those minutes. Would somebody like to recommend approval or move approval of one of those versions of those minutes? If there's no other comments? Okay.
Okay, I'll go for it. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
Excellent. Is there a second to move forward with the minutes as amended as presented with the amendment added?
I'll second that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Hazen. Let's just go ahead and take that to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. The the January minutes are approved as modified.
I didn't vote because I wasn't at the meeting.
Good to know. Thank you. Next section is committee process. I think we typically take this as an opportunity for us as members of the committee to discuss through the individual processes. I will ask real quick if Christine has anything to input at this point in the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. I think I would just mention, although I believe all the committee members know, the schedule does look a little bit different from last year. You're not hearing from every single department. This was based on feedback we received from the committee, but every single department has something in the budget document. So you're being prepared, or you're receiving a written report from those departments that you're not actually going to hear from in your work sessions. But if there's any questions that come up, those directors will be available for anything that you need.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Is there any additional questions or recommendations regarding the process for this year's budget committee? Seeing none, I think we will just go ahead and move forward. Oh, Mr. Hazen, yes, please.
But no, not just a follow-up question for Ms. Moody. There were a couple of points, I believe, in which we provided feedback to the staff about the process. And I am just wondering if there is going to be a report back on the feedback received and decisions made, and how that how that feedback was incorporated into the process at some point. Doesn't have to be now. Just a question about how that feedback was handled.
Sure, and I can respond to that now. We did send some emails out, so if you didn't receive those, I can double check when they were sent, but also briefly touched on it at the January meeting. So there were a couple, as you mentioned, a survey, conversations with the budget committee. So that was how we communicated it back out. And then you receiving the draft schedule based on those feedback pieces.
Okay,
excellent. Any other questions or comments from the committee before we move forward with Mr. Mokrowski's budget message? Okay, let's move forward. Steve, you're on.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Budget Committee. Good evening. And to those that are not watching the Stanley Cup playoffs and have tuned in to watch this budget presentation and committee process kickoff, welcome to everyone. And we do appreciate the engagement and participation from our employees and our community, because this is a really important process that we go through each year. I want to start just by, it's spring in Oregon and it's beautiful out. I'm in my office and you can see the sun is just beating in here, and in 5 minutes it could be raining or hailing. And it might be 70 degrees tomorrow and 40 degrees the next day. But I love, I grew up in the Midwest, and there's not much of a spring in the upper Midwest. It sort of goes from winter to mosquito season. And spring in Oregon is my favorite season. I just love it because it's beautiful. And things are constantly changing. It's a time of change, spring is. And I think it's fitting that we have our budget process during the springtime when things are changing and growing and evolving. It makes me reflect on really what we're doing here, which is taking the limited resources that we have from our local taxpayers and our state and federal governments and trying to put them to the best use. And inevitably that requires us to think differently about how we deliver services, how we organize our resources and our people. So let me start by just doing a bit of reflection here. Lane County, its communities, its residents, its businesses, and its governments have been through an incredible 2 years. We've seen a steady barrage of emergencies from a pandemic to a historic wildfire, and our communities have demonstrated amazing resilience through that time and through all of those challenges. Our local government now is called on more than ever to do big things, to solve big problems, to deliver wherever is needed. And you're going to see in this proposed budget presentation and the budget message that you have in our budget presentation here. This is my 8th as county administrator and budget officer, and you'll find a focus on public safety, on housing and shelter, infrastructure maintenance, and workforce development, and an important call to action for a refocused approach to structurally balance our budget. We'll go to this first slide, and I want to first start by getting us grounded in the reality of Lane County's longstanding revenue challenges. Has anyone seen these graphics before? Of course, every year we start, and I know it feels like Groundhog Day. When are we going to look at a different slide? But the reality is that these 2 slides on the screen are a basic indication of the structural funding challenges that Lane County has faced for decades and continues to face. On the left, you see a listing of the 36 counties in Oregon, and it's really hard to read, but it starts at the top with the county that has the lowest permanent property tax rate, and then it goes down, and as the blue lines get bigger, those are the counties that have the larger permanent property tax rate. Josephine County has the lowest permanent property, and actually you see all timber counties there in the top 5, or the lowest 5, I should say, the lowest 5 permanent property tax rates. Lane County is the arrow right next to it at $1.28 per thousand of assessed valuation. You see the red circles are the 5 comparator counties that we oftentimes compare ourselves to. Deschutes County is right above Lane County. Being above Lane County is not a good thing in this case. It means that you have a lower property tax rate. Actually, Deschutes County has the same permanent property tax rate that Lane County has at $1.28. The difference is that Deschutes County has 2 permanent property tax rates for 2 separate public safety districts. So all of their public safety services, the sheriff's office and district attorney services, are funded separately from their permanent rate. Whereas in Lane County, we use our $1.28 to fund our sheriff's office, our DA's office, our assessor, and our youth services, and many, many other services. So our property tax dollars here in Lane County that Lane County collects are stretched extremely thin. So we have a really low permanent property tax rate, and we didn't need a really high permanent property tax rate because we always had logging on federal lands and the revenue that came from logging that would help support road construction and road maintenance and public safety services. And then as logging on federal lands changed, the federal government came in and allocated an entitlement funding program called the Secure Rural Schools. And that's the graph you see on the right that shows this 81% decline, inflation adjusted over the past 20 years. Approximately $50 million a year that we used to receive between our road fund and general fund that we no longer receive to deliver really critical services, particularly in public safety and infrastructure maintenance. So this is as those property tax caps went into effect in the mid-90s and the federal funding dried up, was the perfect storm that has left Lane County in the position that it's been for over a decade, but particularly in the last decade, as we've seen the SRS funding drop off and consistently be at a significantly lower level. We've remained in this place of trying to create some stability, trying to carve out any resources we can to deliver critical services to the community. So we can go to the next slide. And this next slide, of course, you've seen the dollar sign graphic, and this is the indicator oftentimes confusing to Lane County property taxpayers because all Lane County property taxpayers pay their property taxes to Lane County. And our assessor's office collects those funds, and then the assessor's office distributes those funds to all 84 some taxing districts in Lane County. Lane County keeps about 11 cents on the dollar of every property tax dollar that we collect. And we keep that to fund services like public safety provided by the sheriff's office and the district attorney's office and other critical general services to the community, health and human services, juvenile corrections, and other areas. The vast majority of local property taxes help fund our school districts, our city governments, our libraries, parks, water districts, fire districts. And so Lane County has a very small portion of those overall property tax dollars. I want to, before we dive into, we can go to the next slide, and before we dive into the proposed budget, I want to take a minute to do a look back. We'll travel back in time here about a decade or so, and reflect on let me start by reflecting on just the past couple years and the increase in services, in demand for services that we have seen. An increase in demand for services for housing and shelter needs, to primary behavioral and dental health services, to developmental disability services. We've seen a significant increase in demand for services across the board. And let's start with these areas of housing and shelter and human services. In just the past year or so, Lane County has opened or is under construction and developing 4 new permanent supportive housing facilities with over 160 units. We will be opening a new 20,000 square foot low barrier public shelter and navigation center this summer. Those efforts, in partnership with Homes for Good, with the City of Eugene and other partners in our community. Millions of additional dollars have been invested in nonprofit organizations and local government housing and shelter projects. Over 6,000 households have been prevented from eviction due to COVID-19, with nearly $40 million in federal support that Lane County has distributed over the past 2 years. We've had over 51,000 virtual behavioral health visits. Our primary and dental care service demands continue to grow. In March of this year, we saw over 6,000 primary and dental care visits at Lane County federally qualified health centers. We've seen a 27% increase in developmental disabilities clients that have been served just in the past 7 years. So you see a significant demand, and Lane County has risen to that task and continues to respond to the need for services in our community. Much of that work is leveraging state and federal dollars and using local tax dollars to the extent possible, but the increase in resources has come largely from federal and state dollars. In the area of public safety, we've also seen an increased demand for services, from an increase in violent felonies and trial cases. In fact, the courts and the district attorney are expecting over 600 cases to go to trial in 2022. It's a significant increase from prior years. I believe during COVID in 2021, we had approximately 48 trial cases. So a huge, huge increase. We've seen a 38% increase in electronic monitoring participants in the last year, as you'll recall from the sheriff's budget that was approved by the budget committee and adopted by the board for this current fiscal year. The sheriff's office has made a significant shift to investing and growing the electronic monitoring program, and that program continues to grow, and we continue to make additional investments in that program. With the support of the Budget Committee and the Board of Commissioners, we've seen several expansions over the past year and a half in public safety funding, an increase in utilization, I should say, in $4 million in funding to support 4 full-time equivalent positions over 5 years. 50% of that funding came from road fund SRS and 50% came from general fund SRS starting in the current fiscal year. That funding will carry through fiscal year 25-26, and it provides 2 positions, 2 deputy positions in Wesleyan County and 2 deputy positions in the McKenzie area. Additionally, in the last year, the Board of Commissioners supported a $7.2 million allocation of road fund secure rural schools. These will be received through fiscal year 23-24. That again is a 5-year plan and funds 8 FTE, 7 deputies, 2 of which are detectives, and 1 is a sergeant. And that funding will last through fiscal year 26-27. So while on scale, not a huge influx of resources and additional staff for the sheriff's office, we have continued to see stabilization and some steady growth. But again, those are short-term plans over 5 years, as with the public safety levy that will be up for renewal a year from now. These are short 5-year windows where we're trying to do everything we can to leverage, in this case, federal dollars to help support local public safety services. And it's buying us some time to deliver some enhanced service, public safety services to our rural residents, and develop longer term strategies and solutions to our public safety challenges here in Lane County. So the summary of both of those investments is $11.2 million to be spent over 5 years, totaling 12 full-time equivalent positions. I want to now, I want to also just reflect on new facilities. So as we've grown, and I'm going to talk in a minute about the growth in workforce that we've seen, but we'll talk about, this should not be surprising to the Budget Committee and to those watching. If you track where the Board of Commissioners' priorities are, and the board just approved a week ago its new 3-year strategic plan for the next 3 years, and our Board of Commissioners continues to be invested in a safe and healthy county, in developing vibrant communities, in infrastructure, and in supporting our workforce and the people in our community and our organization. So these investments and this focus is a reflection of what the board has identified as its top priorities and the community's top priorities. We've also, during this time, we continue to grow our footprint of facilities and square footage in the community to deliver these services. We're proud that through the stabilization, the financial stabilization that we've been able to create over the last several years, that it has allowed us to think differently, think creatively, and address the space needs of our various operations. For so many years, our parole and probation team has operated out of a wholly inadequate facility that is inaccessible by those under supervision and those who need to visit it on the second floor of the former Community Corrections Center. We have thankfully purchased the property at Four Corners, Highway 99 in Roosevelt, and in an effort both to improve the working conditions for that critical team and access to supervision and services for those under supervision and for the community, and to enhance a critical corridor in our local area. We purchased a several acre property and have renovated. And if you haven't driven by there, please do, and you'll see a night and day facility that now exists, as we've removed some aging facilities and invested significantly in in the facility for our parole and probation staff. Additionally, we've built a new facility for our developmental disabilities team and its clients. I mentioned the 27% increase in the clients that have been served over the last several years, and thanks to funding from the state government, we've seen a significant increase both in staffing and our ability to deliver services to those in our developmental disabilities community. That new facility on the MLK campus will help to increase access to services and enhance the quality of services that we're able to deliver to our clients. We purchased and have now opened a new medication-assisted treatment facility on West 11th. In all of these examples, I would note where Lane County has acquired or built new facilities, we've turned both the property and the facilities into oftentimes what have been problematic areas in the community into first-class, upstanding, incredible facilities and operations that our community can be proud of. Additionally, our waste management team has built a 7.4 acre landfill waste cell that will allow for waste to be collected here in Lane County through 2023, at the same time that we continue to explore and make investments in enhanced recycling and waste diversion programs. I want to shift and talk for a minute about our workforce and reflect on broadly the growth that we have seen in Lane County. Just 10 years ago, Lane County eliminated nearly 200 positions. And if you recall that the right hand of the first slide that we showed you, the SRS slide that showed that steady decline, and if you looked at the last big drop, it was back in 2012-13. That was the year that approximately 200 positions were eliminated. And since that time, our workforce has grown by nearly 700 positions, or approximately 37%. Lane County's total budget during that time has also grown by over 60%. So what we've been able to do through very diligent and focused efforts of our staff, of our budget and financial teams, of our leadership, of our budget committee and our board and our partners in the community, has been to stabilize those reductions. So we've made investments to make sure that we create stability, we stop the bleeding, we get our own financial house in order. And we've done that through a number of things that I'll touch on here in a moment. As important though is the growth in our workforce is the culture of our workforce. We often look to our turnover rates and our employee satisfaction surveys as key indicators of the health of our workforce culture. In 2021, while national employee turnover was over 50% on average nationally for employers, and government turnover rates were at 18.6% nationally, Lane County's turnover rate remained far below at 15.3%. Additionally, 88% of our employees are engaged and satisfied with their job, as indicated in the employee satisfaction survey from 2021. Today, women make up 59% of management positions in Lane County. 59% of all of our managers in Lane County are women. If you compare that to the national average, based on the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 38% of employers nationally have women as managers. Employees of color make up 18% of our workforce today in Lane County. That's an increase of 5% since 2015. And importantly, because our workforce has grown so much, the real numbers are for employees of color, for growing from 179 employees to 370 today. And we continue to make significant investments to grow our BIPOC employment. Of course, earlier this year, Lane County, we've been striving for the #1 healthiest employer in the state of Oregon. We've been stuck at that #2 spot for a few years. And the Portland Business Journal did recognize Lane County as the #1 healthiest large employer in Oregon this last year, as a reflection of intentional investments that we've made in health and wellness. While the current labor market is very competitive, and we see that in the turnover rate nationally and even in our organization, our turnover rate is up even at 15.3%, while below the national average for government. It is still up from prior years in Lane County because we have a competitive labor market. Our ability to recruit and retain talent remains high. This is a time of change. With retirements, trailing spouses, and competition for key staff, we are struggling to recruit and retain in all positions. But on the whole, we are holding our own. And at the same time, we've brought on incredible new talent. I just want to note a few. And of course, the risk always is that you leave people out. But I want to highlight, just as an example of some of the people, and I'm going to bring a few folks here that are new to the organization, that are new positions that the Budget Committee and the board approved for this current fiscal year. First, we have a new Health and Human Services Director, Eve Gray, who joined us from Peace Health and Oregon Medical Group. Eve has been with us just for a few months and has just begun to make some exciting new hires to lead our community health centers, our human service division, and the administration area in Health and Human Services. We're really excited about the leadership team in Health and Human Services. Latife Amato has joined us as our new equity manager. This is a position that we proposed in the budget for this current fiscal year. The Budget Committee and the Board of Commissioners enthusiastically approved that position, and Latife has joined us, joined our organization in the past few months, and is doing great work. Tina Saltisiak is our new data and analytics manager. This is also a position that was created in the current fiscal year. Tina began her job yesterday, and I had an opportunity to meet with her in my office yesterday and talk about our vision for data analytics in Lane County. And we're excited to have Tina join us in the great work that she will be helping to lead us to be better at what we do. That's really what we want to do with our data analytics program, is help us be better at everything that we do. We've had also a lot of internal movement. Lauren Blythe is our new interim operations director. Greg Rickoff has moved to be our new community justice director. Steve Adams is our new policy director. Mary Vuksic Schaefer is our new deputy assessor. Robert Tintel has moved to be our ARPA manager. Sarai Johnson is our new affordable housing plan coordinator. The list goes on and on. And that is something that we're really proud of, that we like to see movement within the organization. We like to see employees moving and having opportunity to grow their careers, have new experiences, but stay within Lane County and continue to contribute. We have a number of key positions that we continue to recruit for, and our finance manager and our county clerk and other key positions. So all of this, we can go to the next slide here, and this is all to set up a theme of thinking differently about how we deliver services, moving away from an oftentimes insular, siloed approach and leaning into broader connectedness. Lane County has been at the forefront in responding to these significant challenges in our community over the last several years. One of the comments that we put in the budget message is that in addition to the growth in workforce of 37% and the growth in overall budget of 60%, it's important to note that the vast majority of that growth has come through state and federal funds. In fact, 60% of Lane County's total operating budget is state and federal resources. Approximately 40% of our resources are local taxes, local fees, and fines. So really important, much different than we often see at other governmental levels, particularly at cities, for example, where cities are highly reliant on local resources to fund the services that they deliver. Counties, when done well, leverage as much of state and federal dollars as we possibly can. So through all of this, over the past decade, we've gone from significant reductions to creating stability and growing to respond to emergencies, adapting to the needs of the community, leveraging resources, and meeting the service needs that our community has. We also talked about, I've used this phrase, the cloud of perceived abundance. And we should say that we are so thankful for the funding support that we've received from the state and federal government, because it's been critical to respond to the emergencies of COVID-19 and the wildfires, and to begin recovery. And we don't have time to go through all of we will over the next couple of weeks talk about those resources, but it's important to remember that the resources that we're receiving from the state and federal government as it relates to the response and recovery of these emergencies is almost exclusively one-time resources that we will receive for a couple years, and then it will be spent, and that cloud will part. And we will be left with the reality of Lane County's long-standing revenue challenges. Going back to the first slide, right? Our very low permanent property tax rate, our depleted federal funding to help offset the timber revenue, and the high demand and expectation for services in the community. So we need to face that reality and that understanding at the same time that we appreciate, celebrate, and are going to put to great use the resources, these one-time resources we're receiving from the state and federal government. They will not last forever. And we have some tough days ahead. And when I say days, I mean months and years ahead, that we're going to really need to work on refocusing our efforts on structurally balancing our budget. So much of the last several years has been looking at our cost centers. So we've looked, one of the first questions I asked when I came to Lane County was, how much are we spending on employee health insurance? Because we know our pension system, we don't have a lot of control over. It's a state pension system. We have very little control over it. The answer was $25 million. And our philosophy was, boy, if we can manage that resource more effectively and slow the growth in those expenses that in the market tend to grow 10, 15, 20% year over year, if we can slow that growth and manage it better, that's more money that we can put into direct services and less of the taxpayer resources that need to go towards just funding an increase in cost that does not have a corresponding increased benefit to employees. We also focused on debt management. We focused on vacancy management and really understanding how many vacancies do we have and managing those vacancies appropriately so that we're budgeting effectively for the positions we actually need to fill. We have worked on managing our PERS resources through PERS side accounts and refinancing of some of that debt where we possibly can. But now we need to shift to work on innovation, transformation, and modernization. And what does that mean? What that means is, to me, is understanding not just where our cost centers are, but where our revenue centers are. Where do we make money as an organization? And how can we leverage those resources when there's connectedness between revenue centers and cost centers in terms of the people that we see, the people that we serve in those areas where there's crossover and connectedness? How can we think differently? And this is why we talk about, as opposed to a siloed approach, that we're going to just look at this service and deliver that service the best that we can, that we now start to really think about interconnected, and not to say that this has not happened already, because it has. And I'd point to our public safety system in particular, where arguably Lane County is far ahead of many other communities nationally in the way that we address public safety concerns, in understanding the connectedness between law enforcement and mental health services and substance abuse and housing and other human service needs. But in other areas, thinking about where that connectedness exists, and how can we leverage those revenue centers to support those cost centers, again, where there's connectivity in those areas. So we can go to the last slide here, and I will wrap up, and we'll have a few minutes for questions. So in a nutshell, actually, I think we have one more slide after this. The proposed fiscal year 22-23 budget is balanced without layoffs or cuts in services. That's consistent with the last several years. And we're very proud as an organization that we have not leaned into cut, because this organization has had to do cut in years past. And so much of our effort has been trying to, again, create that stability and make investments in repair services where we can. The challenge that we will highlight here in this budget is that while all of our funds are balanced, not all of our funds are structurally balanced, which means that in the following 4 areas, revenues do not equal expenses. Our ongoing expenses exceed our ongoing revenues, and we need to dip into our savings account. In other words, our reserve in these 4 funds in order to balance. And I will argue, as I've been one of the first to argue, we don't use one-time money for one-time expenses. I would argue that this is appropriate because all of our funds continue to exceed our financial policies as it relates to the amount of reserves that we have. So we have reserves available to do this. And we're calling out explicitly that we have these 4 funds that need attention. And we want some time to develop plans and strategies to address those structural imbalances, as opposed to asking for cuts. Nobody wants to go through that process. We want to think more creatively and collaboratively on how to address those challenges. So in the general fund, where we face approximately a $2.3 million structural imbalance next year, and that structural imbalance will continue to grow in future years. And so it is a real challenge that we will talk about throughout this budget process. In our land management fund, that is, and I'll just make this comment about the general fund. The general fund is like the mothership. While we have approximately 32 funds that we organize our resources in, the health and success of the entire organization lives and dies with the general fund, because the general fund has tentacles everywhere. The general fund helps support our youth services, helps support human services, helps support public health, helps, of course, support the sheriff's office and the district attorney and all of our general services. When the general fund isn't healthy, it impacts all other areas. Most other counties in Oregon have general fund support for their land management operation. Lane County does not, because we don't have the available resources to provide support. And so what does that do? It puts additional pressure on land management fees that we have to charge customers for fees. It also puts pressure on the number of staff that we can actually afford to have, which impacts the quality of service that we can deliver. So you see how the same is true for parole and probation that is structurally imbalanced. We rely heavily, almost exclusively, on state funding. And as the state has steadily declined its commitment to funding the Community Corrections Act fund, and we don't use general fund to support parole and probation, even though most other counties in Oregon do, we've been forced to reduce and impact services. And the same is true with parks. Most other counties have some general fund property tax support for their parks, because we all care about our park system, but Lane County does not, because we don't have the available resources. So we rely heavily on transient room taxes, and we need a financial fix to those challenges. So these are complex issues that we have a lot of work to do. And you can go to the last slide here, and we'll try to end on I will say this is one of the more sobering budget messages in recent years. We try to be hopeful and optimistic about what's in front of us. But we do have some real challenge. At the same time that we've grown and we've added, we're responding to the needs of the community, we also have some real challenges that we need to address so that we can continue to deliver services that the community needs. So while we face some of these structural challenges, we are still saying we need to make some additional investments in law enforcement and in emergency management. You'll see a couple of additional positions for the DA's office that has seen just a huge increase. You heard the number of trials and the number of felony cases. Just the processing of cases is a challenge. We continue to make investments in emergency management, and if any investment has paid off in the last few years, that one has in the shift and really significant investment we've made there. And we have a number of investments in infrastructure maintenance for the vast array of facilities we're now responsible for. We're proposing a new department. This is a bringing together of two parts of our organization that have been that have not received the focus and attention and support that they should. Youth services was one of the most heavily impacted areas of Lane County during the 2012 reductions. And since that time, it was merged into a large Department of Health and Human Services. Parole and probation has lived in county administration, and we've worked closely with the staff in both of those areas and determined that a really important organizational and structural investment in this new department will help support the long-term vitality and quality of services there. And finally, as an indicator of the type of modernization and transformation that we're talking about broadly in the organization, we've developed a new policy team. And this is, we say it's a new team, it's really a team of folks that are doing incredible work, from our legislative affairs to our ARPA management to affordable housing and climate action. But all of those portfolios have lived in different parts of the organization, siloed, if you will, not by intention, and great work happening there. But as we started to think about this growth that we've had and the opportunity available with state and federal resources, we started thinking differently about how to organize our policy work, and that actually we may be leaving opportunities on the table. So what if we brought together the incredible team of talent that we have, I should say the incredible individuals of talent that we have, and bring them together as a coordinated and collaborative team. And so we're really excited about this policy team and the work that it will do in leveraging opportunities. So I'm going to stop there. I thank you for your attention to what oftentimes I know can be a long and winding, but I'd like to provide a high-level thematic view of this budget, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty and the details and all of those challenges. But it's important to understand, I think, where we've been, where we are, and where we're headed, both the positive and the challenges that we have ahead of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Murkowski. Any follow-up questions or clarifications from committee members for Steve's budget message? Yes,
Chair.
Mr. Pryor.
Just a quick one. You mentioned that you want to be able to use reserves in 4 areas in the budget this time, which is, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but the question that what I would ask is, if you're wanting to use one-time money to pay for these 4 departments that's ongoing, do you have any sort of an estimate or a projection of when you might get back to self-sufficiency or not having to use reserves?
Yeah, well, I think the answer varies based on the fund. I'll take the Parks Fund, for example. The board and our leadership team in Parks and Public Works have had a number of conversations about work to enhance ongoing funding for parks. And there have been no final decisions there, but I know that there are some new discussions about the potential for new revenue opportunities to support ongoing park funding. So that, I mean, we believe that that is necessary to, if we want to invest in a vibrant park system where we can maintain our assets, we really need to identify some new ongoing revenue. In parole and probation, that is a tough one. It likely needs some general fund support, and it is unlikely to see how general fund support will help there. Our focus is primarily in parole and probation on lobbying the legislature for additional funding. And on land management, we've had a number of discussions about adjustments to fees, and you know, that's a challenging one because we want to make sure that fees are that we don't outprice folks in the market, that we're being responsive to the needs of our customers and our clients. So, you know, we have, I think the answer depends on the fund that we're talking about. And I think it's also a combination in the general fund, we're going to need to look at the allocation of resources across the board. So the general fund, as I mentioned, so the tentacles of the general fund, we're going to need to look at where all the general fund resources are supporting and where there are opportunities to think differently about leveraging of resources.
Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Traeger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that presentation. It's really helpful every year. It just cements it a little further for me. And I just really particularly wanted to appreciate and uplift this concept of the policy team. And for those that don't know, our community members, it's only the addition of one human and they have been reassigned from another position. So it's really not, I mean, it's a new way of organizing the work. And what I love so much about it, and what I'm so optimistic about it, is to me, it's really creates an intention around thinking partnership and strategy that is very zoomed out. The individual members of the team are zoomed in on solving the problems and implementing the programs that they do. But as a team, they have that zoomed out focus and that ability to really create some long range vision. It kind of gets to your point, Chris, prior about what's the long range plan to keep these initiatives in place and continually innovate around how we're addressing community issues. So I just see it as such a great way of structuring work where, like I said, the individual players on the team get to do their day-to-day work, but as a group, as a department, as a team, they get to really be that high-level thinking partnership for one another, and ultimately and eventually secure new resources and revenue, or rethink how to structure the work so that because of that intention and integration, there's greater efficiencies. And to the point, like you mentioned about our employee health insurance benefits, that if the cost is continuing to go up, the output is as well. And we're getting more for that investment. So I just really wanted to elevate that particular proposal in this year's budget and give my full support and appreciation for that creative way of approaching the work.
Chair, if I can just make one other, is it all right if I make one comment just there in response? And I think, you know, my response to member Pryor was kind of winding. And, you know, there's a bottom line here that if we had a solution to the structural budget challenges in those 4 funds, we would have proposed it. So part of what we're doing here is acknowledging that we need some time. That, you know, what I don't want to do is be in a position where we haven't exhausted every opportunity before we go and ask our departments for cut plans. That, to me, that is a last resort, is to say, okay, give us your cut. I mean, we are going to have to look at the expenditure side, because there's a reality that our expenses are growing. And this is across the board in all of our funds. It's just that many of our funds are enterprise type funds, our community health centers and our waste management fund, right? Where we have the ability to make adjustments we can we can generate revenue by seeing more patients or by adjusting fees, and there's flexibility in those places. But the areas that we highlighted, we don't have that flexibility. It's very difficult to increase revenue, and any reduction in expense would come with a reduction in service, most likely. So some of the answer to the question about what's the long-term plan, some of it is policy related. Some of it is going to be, we'll need to see policy decisions, particularly on the revenue side. And some of it is going to be developing thoughtful plans from our leaders in the organization about, on the expense side, about how we can think differently about services and make adjustments on the expenditure side. So I didn't want to give you a non-answer, but the answer is, we have work to do. We have some real work to do. And that's, remember that when we say like a $2.3 million structural imbalance in the general fund, that's just next year. But costs grow, and expenses are growing at a faster pace than revenue is growing. And so there's, that imbalance will continue to grow. So it's a real challenge that we need to get serious about. And I will then stop talking after I say a thank you. I always forget to do this. The thank you to the people that do the work, to Christine Moody, our budget manager, who you're going to hear from, to our budget team, Jill Allen and Joe Celesta and Tanya Ellis, and then of course the staff, the leadership and staff in our departments that do so much of the behind the scenes work and entering budgets. And this has been a tough budget year, and we're so thankful for the folks who've put in a lot of work to bring this to where it's at.
Thank you. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. First, I just want to commend, Steve, last year as chair, you and I were talking about these new policy teams and a new way to approach this. And I think that that's very fundamental and significant, because you know what? The streams that come of resources and dollars that come into the county are siloed, and there's no way to get around that. So that for the county to develop this team approach, even though we still have to spend so much time dotting the I's, crossing the T's, reporting to the various siloed funders, the ability on the local level to then pull it all together and be more impactful becomes even more imperative in this era of, other than the cloud, finite resources. That's comment number one. And comment number two is that it's interesting to see modernization. 35 years ago, one of my mentors told me that in corporate structure, people were going to start not making more money because of how many people they supervised under them, which I've noticed in contract negotiations is still the case at the county somewhat. But they're going to start making salaries commensurate with the partnerships and folks that aren't on their payroll that they're coordinating with and impacting in concentric circles. So I think the county is doing both of those. And thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make those two comments.
Excellent. Thank you. Commissioner Verder, can you lower your hand for me just to keep my screen straight? Thank you. Any other quick questions for Mr. Mokryski? Okay, thank you, Steve. And we'll move forward. Ms. Moody, your presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair Blodman. As mentioned, we'll get into some of the details and some overview of the actual numbers behind the budget that Steve has just described to you. So for your fiscal year 22-23 proposed budget, total budget size is just over $974 million. That is a decrease for the current year budget that we're in of about 7%. That's occurring because of the one-time money that you're hearing about. So a lot of one-time money, state and federal, coming into the budget in the current year started in 2021. And we're starting to see that be spent down, although some of it is definitely still lingering, and we'll highlight some of those for you as we go through the process. So as already mentioned, also, we have 32 distinct funds across the county. So pie chart there just to kind of show you the relative size, and I'll pull the general fund out later in the presentation and focus on that one a bit. So here is the budget shown to you in fund type. So as mentioned, the general fund being the primary operating fund of the county, but special revenue fund, the second line that you see there, is predominantly the largest source of funding in the county. And special revenue, meaning that those funds have strings attached to them, specific uses. They cannot just be used for anything. So we're now at over 50% of our funding in that fund type. You'll also see that's the place where we're seeing the largest dollar decrease occurring. And again, that's the one-time money coming in, things like the rent relief funds that came through Health and Human Services. So year over year, that number is going down, and that is why. You're seeing a few of the other decreases I'll highlight for you. The debt service fund, there's been some payoff of debt occurring there. And then the capital fund, that's going to fluctuate year to year as projects occur. So developmental and disabilities building being one of our larger one that's being completed in the current year. The FTE, we touched a little bit on the FTE size for the county. So we're just below 2,000 FTE, 1985. And the chart here is meant to show you by service category. You can also see some of this information in your document. Throughout the slides here, I've tried to highlight the page numbers of your proposed budget document if you'd like additional information. But so you'll see predominantly the most FTE occurring in public health, human services, followed by public safety and general government, and then roads. So just to cover some budget basic terms, even though I know this committee is becoming well versed in these, we don't have any new committee members this year. We do have public that watches these meetings. So just some of the terms we use that might not be readily known by everyone. So you'll hear us talk about both revenue and resources. Revenue meant to be the new money coming into the county. Property tax and non-property tax is the way that the statute refers to it. But we receive a lot of it through those state and federal resources, fees, licenses, fines. The county also has resources. Revenue is part of the resources. And the big difference between those two is the money being carried forward every year over year. So you have a reserve in a fund. You don't spend that reserve, you're going to carry it forward as your beginning fund balance the next year. But it is a resource that you could expend if you needed to. So that's the difference there. And then on the other side of the equation, you'll hear us discuss requirements versus expenses. Expenditures are also defined in statute, so they're going to include personnel, material and services, capital expenses, and our debt service. And then requirements includes those expenditures, but also includes those contingencies and reserves, as well as transfers across our funds. And then if we had any unappropriated ending fund balance, which is a type of reserve. I won't read through all of these terms, but this slide is also available on our website. So just defining some of the terms that I just said, personnel, material, and services. The term appropriation is also used in budget. So meaning that we're saying a specific amount of money is appropriated for a specific purpose in a year. Reserves are not appropriated. And then just the flow of the money within the county and how it's accounted for. So the reason we highlight that we have 32 funds is that is basically the top of the structure. Each fund must balance on its own. And so within each fund, then you will have organizational units. For us, we call them departments. And then within those departments, you see the object classifications of personnel, material and services, debt service. So you can follow this in our budget document as well. Within that object classification, just to point out for people, the department budgets versus the fund budgets, and they do contain different things. Basically the department expenditures. So in your department sections of your proposed budget document, you're going to see their personnel, material and services, and capital expenses associated with that department. You won't see fund transfer expenses or reserves. Those actually belong to the fund that department is part of. But you can see all of those pieces that belong to the fund, transfers, contingency, reserves, in your non-departmental section of your budget document. Those will be highlighted separately for you. And balanced budget, so required by budget law, our resources have to equal our requirements. We cannot have an unbalanced budget. We can't run a deficit in any of our funds. And as already been touched on, and I'll touch on a little bit more, the structural balance of the budget. So while not legally required, it is fiscally responsible to make sure that you're structurally balanced, that your ongoing revenue is going to be as much as your ongoing expenses. Otherwise, you end up with an unbalance, and eventually you would spend your reserves and not have the resources to cover your ongoing expenses. So a little more detail for you, and there is some of this detail just presented in different ways in the financial summary section of your budget document. But here's the revenue pieces. So predominantly state revenue. I'm comparing here on the chart also current year budget in red, the bottom bar of each category, to the proposed budget that you're seeing. So you can see state revenue being the highest in the county, and it is going down year over year. We do have internal fees and charges for our departments, such as technology services or fleet. They charge other departments, so there are fees occurring within the budget, the same money being moved around. Taxes and assessments, predominantly property tax for the county. We do have some other things like state shared liquor tax, car rental tax, transient room tax that appear in that category. And then federal revenue being the largest decrease, and a lot of that being the ARP, the American Rescue Plan funds that were received over 2 years will not be received again next year. They'll be held in reserves next year and being spent. And those revenues related to the COVID recovery. I won't highlight all the rest there for you, but the other resources, fund balance, as mentioned, just year over year, it is slightly going down as some of that one-time money is being spent. Transfers between funds is showing quite a substantial decrease. The large part of that is because we closed the Lane Care Fund and moved it into another fund, and those funds had to be transferred in the current year. And then youth services moving out of a special revenue back into the general fund. They had not been in the general fund since about fiscal year 12-13. You'll hear me mention that a few times. It also skews some of the general fund numbers, but that also, they used to receive a transfer. They will no longer receive a transfer. And then funds move around within the same fund as well. And then on the expenditure side, material and services is the largest category for the county. It is decreasing. A large part of that is those one-time monies like the rent relief that I mentioned does show up in our material and services category when we pay it out to other agencies. And then personnel services being the second largest category, followed by capital and debt. And those other requirements that I mentioned, just the other side of the equation, the transfers between funds again, the intra-fund transfers occurring, and then our contingency and reserves. And you see both of those also slightly decreasing year over year, again, as those funds are spent down, and in a few cases that we've highlighted where we're needing to spend reserves to keep services stable. So just to touch on reserves, this chart is not meant to be read here. You do have it in your budget document, and it has additional detail about the restrictions of reserves in each of these funds. But this just highlights for you that we have reserves and why we have reserves. We need them for cash flow, especially within the general fund where we do not receive property taxes until November, December. We have to begin paying our bills on July 1st. So having reserves enables us to do that, as well as our other funds that wait on money from federal and state resources, or as they begin to collect fees and charges. Our bond rating is assisted by having reserves, so that's a big piece of what our bond rating agencies look for. So that's like our credit rating. And so they will look at both our policy about our reserves, whether we meet our policy, and they will compare us to other like organizations. So what those counties and cities are doing does impact us as well. We need it for places where we need to invest in future equipment. So we save up and plan ahead for purchasing fleet vehicles, plan ahead for purchasing equipment, maintenance on buildings, those things. So reserves are needed in those cases. And we need it for service and revenue stabilization. So the fact that we have a service and higher reserves in the general fund is enabling us to meet our policies still and keep our reserve levels where they need to be, but also be able to spend some reserves to keep services stable. So anytime we have revenue fluctuations or the economy, or to protect our assets, that last example being road fund. So the road fund has the highest reserve policy requirements because of those road and bridge assets that we need to protect just in case something happens. So you will hear more about the American Rescue Plan, and you also heard this from me last year, but just for anyone listening, the American Rescue Plan was signed in 2021. It was a large stimulus bill in order to assist cities, counties, states with some recovery funds to recover from the pandemic. Next slide. And Lane County received a direct payment from those ARP funds of $74 million. We have through December of 2024 to spend those funds. There are specific allowable uses. There's some auditing requirements. They are one-time funds, as we've mentioned, so we're really looking to spend them on one-time expenditures. And you'll hear more of this at the last work session. You'll hear from Robert Tentel, our ARC manager, who will share with the committee some of those decisions that have been made by the Board of Commissioners, the projects and the different areas that the county is investing those funds. So more to come on that one. Now to turn to the general fund. So as already mentioned, this is our general operating fund of the county. It provides services within this fund include public safety, the sheriff's office, district attorney, youth services, justice courts, also our general government services such as assessment and taxation, elections, and then our public health and some of our other central services like finance facilities, county administration. About 30 to 35% of the county's FTE is funded by the general fund, either through transfer or being part of the general fund itself. The total size of the general fund for 22-23 is estimated to be $139 million. This is a 2% increase from the current year. FTE will now be at 528. That is an increase year over year of 57.3, but as I mentioned, youth services is coming back into the fund. So predominantly that movement of youth services is bringing back about 50 FTE into the fund. And then there's an addition of 7.5 FTE that you'll hear about from departments in areas including the district attorney's office, emergency management, and our facilities areas. So general fund resources, you'll hear us talk about discretionary general fund. By that term, we mean the discretionary general fund that the county receives that is not dependent on a department activity. The only exception to that being assessment and taxation, since their work generates our property taxes. But we're talking about property tax revenue, timber revenue, secure rural schools, shared state revenues, those things that we really receive for being a county. They're not directly deposited into department budgets, but that is funds that our general fund departments spend. Every dollar of the discretionary general fund is accounted for on the service option sheets that you'll find in your budget committee binders, and they are also posted online if anyone wants to see those broken out by service within our departments and where those funds are spent. And then breaking up the discretionary general fund, showing you by service category here. Over half of those funds are spent within public safety. The contingency and reserve, we're showing that as well, accounts for about 25% of that discretionary general fund. And then there's general government and public health being right about 10% on each of those. Then here's the resources within the general fund. Again, just comparing it year over year for you. So a few I'll highlight for you. Property taxes and assessments are growing. Property tax itself is projected to grow by about 3.25%. Our fund balance is going down slightly again because we're spending some of that reserves in the general fund in 22-23. Administrative charges you'll see is going up. That's the indirect plan revenue that pays for our central services. So we charge our other departments to pay for central services. So as those costs go up, the revenue goes up. And the federal revenue decrease you see occurring here in the general fund is the result of receiving a FEMA payment in the current year. for the holiday farm fire that we won't receive again. And then there's also fund transfers going up. That's an increase in road fund secure rural schools to pay for some sheriff's office patrol expansion that you will hear more about as we go through the process as well. There's also interdepartment reimbursement. And I want to point that out because in some places within the budget document, you will see it lumped in together with administrative charges. But it is the place where we are accounting for those ARP, American Rescue Plan funds, moving across departments. So when a department is awarded a project or FTE to be supported with those funds, they receive an allocation of the American Rescue Plan funds. And so we're accounting for it in that administrative interdepartmental funds because they were already received into the American Rescue Plan funds. But I just want to show you here that in the general fund in 22-23, we're expected to receive about 1.8 million. Then on the expenditure requirement side, personnel services, that larger increase that you're seeing there is the movement of youth services, although we are seeing increases in wages due to cost of living increases and market adjustments. Material and services, I mentioned the 2.4 CPI. That's the budget direction that we give to our departments to limit our material and services growth to what is projected by the Oregon Economic Forecast in December of last year, wherever possible. But so it's increasing because of CPI and then also one-time expenses occurring. Fund transfers are showing a decrease because youth services will no longer receive a transfer. Their expenses are actually within the fund. And the reserves decreasing because of the spending needed. We do still meet the 20% minimum reserve requirement. We also have a couple special reserves right now related to some future capital planning reserve of $2 million and additional patrol reserve that has been allocated by the Board of Commissioners as being spent down over 5 years. And then some reserves for navigation center operations that aren't expected to be needed until 23-24 because of additional funding. And we'll hear more about that from Health and Human Services, and that's identified on your service option sheet as well for that service. So to touch a little more on the structural balance. So the proposed budget, as already mentioned, is not structurally balanced by 2.3 million. The causes, well, we've mentioned some of them. The ones that I'm highlighting here for you are growth in wages, higher than previously anticipated. So when market and COLAs are higher than we projected in past forecasts, that will cause it to go out of balance there. We're seeing, of course, increased material and service costs, just like everywhere else with CPI being high. Revenue growth is slow, in some places even going down. A few I'll highlight for you are recording revenue. That's our property tax or our property deeds with sales. As interest rates go up, we see decreases in that area. And our state marijuana revenue allocation has decreased after the passage of Measure 110, which redistributed funds that were coming to counties to go for other purposes. There have been some service additions to try and meet the changing needs of the community and the high workloads throughout the county. And there's been an increase in internal charges within our Health and Human Services in particular, moving youth services out of that department resulted in the internal charges needing to be allocated to less divisions, one of those divisions being Human Services that receives general fund, and then just the shift that occurs when we receive one money across the county. And previously our dawn to dawn expansion, which is a service that most of our committee will be familiar with, had been seen as a one-time expense when we first did that expansion, which was prior to COVID. That's no longer being counted as a one-time. It's not seen as something that will change in the near future. So that has had an impact there as well. So as mentioned, plans are being developed to look at how to do things differently, to review positions when they come up vacant for hiring, and analyzing internal expenditures, as well as anything else to get back into structural balance. And then here's just a graphic for you of the general fund forecast. You've seen this every year from me. We refer to it as the JAWS graph. You do not want to see the red line above the blue line, but unfortunately that is what we see. And Even in the years that you've heard us say that we're structurally balanced in recent years, it has always been just barely. So it just comes down to revenue not growing as fast as expenses. Property tax being our predominant revenue source in the general fund, and it having limitations on how fast it can grow. And just some future cautions. Some of them you've heard from us already. You know, the things that we're seeing, wages, we have a very tight labor market, so we expect that pressure to continue. Services currently supported with one-time funds. So this really goes above and beyond the structural balance, but just goes to the piece that we have services being provided right now that don't have an identified ongoing source of revenue. So the ARPA funds coming into the fund, as I mentioned, Secure Rural Schools funds are being used to expand patrol services, 12 FTE there of 2.3 million in fiscal year 22-23. That will last for a few more years. And then we have some limited in duration positions, not a lot within the general fund, but there are a few, including our deputy assessor that was added in anticipation of our assessor retiring. And we're adding 1 FTE in emergency management. And then of course we have positions supporting the Holiday Farm fire effort, but are expected to be limited in duration. We're seeing increased service needs from the community, especially in the areas of housing, behavioral health, and public safety. And the structural balance, the influx of the one-time money, as we've already discussed, that overall sense of abundance, we really need to exercise caution that anything we do, we don't increase ongoing expenses, even inadvertently. And then at the same time, making sure to watch our expenses, that we don't increase them in a way that our revenue would not be able to keep up. And then just to touch on our aging capital assets, as well as the purchase of new assets. So you've heard from me talk about the aging of capital assets for the last few years. 2016, our internal auditor had mentioned that we were seeing that occur. And so we took steps to develop a countywide capital improvement plan. We're making sure to plan ahead. But with purchasing of new assets and replacing of assets, we're of course also increasing the operating expenses that go along with those. So just a caution that we need to continue to analyze as we are doing anytime we take on new expenditures that will continue into the future. And then just to end on some positive notes, the foundational strength that the county has that helps us through these times when we have to come up with solutions to the issues. So the strategic plan helps guide us. We have priorities, key strategic initiatives. We have very strong financial policies and the highest bond rating that the county has had. So our service stabilization reserve, our structural balance policy that we will get back into structural balance anytime that we need to step out of that. Community trust building, the public safety levy being a big piece of that. And then the people in our organizational health. The diverse, highly skilled workforce has a deep commitment to delivering services to Lane County residents. And with that, I am open for questions. I think the one thing I'll mention for anyone watching is that we do post everything on this website being shown here that the Budget Committee receives. So all the materials or anything I've referenced can be found on this website.
Thank you, Ms. Moody. Questions from the committee? Oop. I don't see any hands up. Okay, thank you, Ms. Moody. Let's take and we're going to do a break. Let's just try to hold it to 5 minutes. Let's get back here at 7 o'clock. We've got the public comment period, and we don't want to keep those people waiting. So we'll see you at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m., pardon me, and we'll reconvene. Thank you. let's give it a minute to get a couple more committee members back, and then we'll move forward. Seeing that there's nobody signed up for public comment, we'll move forward. So we're into the last section of the agenda here, which is committee business. Ms. Moody, did you have anything else to bring forward to the committee?
I don't have anything specific. I'll just maybe remind the committee about the next meeting, which is Thursday, and we'll be in person in the Board of Commissioners conference room.
Excellent. And is there an agenda prepared for that meeting?
There is. We will send that out to you here before tonight.
Excellent.
Hearing from staff.
Thank you.
See you tonight.
Commissioner Buck.
I was just curious if we need to at least open and close the hearing officially or not, even if nobody signed up.
I think it sounds like a great idea. I think we'll go ahead and do that. So I'll open the public hearing section of the meeting, and it's been reported that there's nobody signed up or available to make public comment, and so we will officially close the public hearing portion of the meeting. Thank you, Commissioner Bach. Any additional committee business from the members? Seeing none, we will go ahead and close this meeting of the Budget Committee. We will see you all on Thursday in person. So see you then. Thank you.
See you then.
Meeting adjourned.